She walked into my office, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. I closed the door behind her, the click echoing in the silent room. Her eyes met mine with that familiar look of trust, oblivious to the storm about to break. Without a word, I took her by the hand, guiding her to my desk. I could feel her heartbeat quicken, her breath hitching in anticipation. Gently, I bent her over, spreading her legs with deliberate care. The fabric of her skirt slid down easily, revealing the soft, vulnerable skin beneath. Every motion was calculated, every touch a step toward the inevitable. As I stood behind her, poised to execute the final phase of my plan, a cold realization gripped me. This moment would haunt them forever. They'd regret everything, from their first flirtatious glance to the last sordid encounter. They had no idea what was coming. They wouldn't have a chance to fight back, to undo what was done. And as the pieces of my revenge fell perfectly into place, I knew I'd changed everything, not just for them, but for me too. There was no turning back, only the cold satisfaction of watching their world unravel at my hands. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The alarm buzzed softly, pulling me out of sleep. I reached over to silence it, then lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling as the first light of dawn crept through the curtains. My thoughts quickly shifted to the day ahead, another busy day at the dealership. There were meetings to attend, deals to finalize, and a mountain of paperwork to get through. But before all that, there was the routine, the morning ritual that kept everything in order. I slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake Lily. She was still curled up under the covers, her dark hair spilling over the pillow. I stood there for a moment, watching her sleep, feeling a mix of affection and something else, something I couldn't quite name, but that had been lingering at the edges of my mind lately. Shaking off the thought, I headed for the shower. The hot water cleared my head, focusing my mind on the tasks ahead. By the time I was dressed, the familiar sounds of Lily moving about the kitchen reached me, along with the smell of fresh coffee. I descended the stairs, the scent of breakfast pulling me into the comforting routine of our morning. "Morning," I greeted her as I entered the kitchen. "Morning," she replied with a smile, flipping pancakes on the griddle. Her voice was warm, a pleasant contrast to the cool morning air that had seeped into the house overnight. I poured myself a cup of coffee, watching her out of the corner of my eye. Lily had always been beautiful, but there was something different about her lately. She seemed more distant, though I couldn't put my finger on why. Maybe it was the job at the flower store, the long hours away from home, or perhaps it was just my imagination. The sound of footsteps on the stairs pulled me out of my thoughts. Emily, our 14-year-old daughter, entered the kitchen first. Her focus was already on her phone, barely acknowledging us as she grabbed a piece of toast. She muttered a quick morning before turning her attention back to whatever drama was unfolding in her world. Jacob, our 12-year-old son, followed closely behind, more alert and eager for the day ahead. He greeted us with a cheerful, "Good morning," his eyes lighting up at the sight of the pancakes on the table. Breakfast passed in a blur of conversation and last-minute preparations. Emily and Jacob chatted about their plans for the day. Emily was excited about a school project, while Jacob talked about his upcoming soccer practice. Their voices filled the room, a familiar and comforting sound that I had grown used to over the years. Before long, the kids were out the door, off to school, leaving Lily and me alone again. I glanced at the clock and realized it was time for me to head out. "I've got to get going," I said, placing a hand on Lily's shoulder as I passed by. "Busy day ahead." "Of course," she replied with a nod, her smile polite but distant. "I'll see you tonight." "See you tonight," I echoed, grabbing my briefcase and heading for the door. As I drove to the dealership, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just this morning, it had been building for a while now. But I pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the work that awaited me. I had a business to run, and whatever was going on with Lily could wait. It all started innocently enough, or at least that's what Lily probably told herself in the beginning. A smile here, a laugh there. Nothing more than the kind of friendly banter that happens between coworkers every day. But with each passing week, those small moments between her and Tommy Miller, the store's courier, began to carry more weight. Lily worked at Blooming Inspirations, a quaint flower store nestled in the heart of our town. The store was a local gem, known for its vibrant arrangements and personalized service. It had a steady stream of customers, brides-to-be, people planning events, and others who simply wanted to brighten someone's day with a bouquet of fresh flowers. Rose Parker, the store's owner, had built the business from the ground up, pouring her heart into every detail. Rose was in her mid-50s, a warm and motherly figure who treated Lily more like a daughter than an employee. Lily had always loved working there. It gave her a sense of peace and purpose, a place where she could escape from the pressures of home life and immerse herself in the simple beauty of flowers. Tommy was different from the people Lily usually interacted with. He had a boyish charm about him, a casual confidence that seemed almost effortless. At 32, he was younger than both of us, with an easy smile and a way of making people feel like they were the center of his world, even if only for a moment. As the courier for Blooming Inspirations, Tommy was in and out of the store all day, handling deliveries and picking up orders. It wasn't long before Lily found herself looking forward to the times when Tommy would pop into the shop, usually with a cheeky grin and a joke ready to brighten the day. At first, it was just casual conversation. Tommy would come in to pick up a delivery or drop off supplies, and he'd linger for a few extra minutes, chatting with Lily about nothing in particular. They'd talk about the latest shipment of flowers, the weather, or whatever else came to mind. Rose didn't seem to notice anything unusual. To her, Tommy was just another employee doing his job, and Lily was just her friendly, dependable worker. But it didn't take long for those conversations to grow a little more personal. Tommy started asking Lily about her day, how she was feeling, what she liked to do when she wasn't at the store. Lily, flattered by the attention, found herself opening up to him more than she had expected. She told him about the pressures of balancing work and home life, about the moments when she felt like she was losing touch with who she used to be. Tommy listened with genuine interest, offering a sympathetic ear and a few well-timed compliments that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. It was harmless, she told herself, just a little bit of fun to break up the monotony of the day. But even then, she must have known it was more than that. There was a thrill in those interactions, a spark that she hadn't felt in a long time. And it wasn't long before that spark began to grow into something more. The flirtation escalated slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. A lingering glance here, a playful touch there. Tommy would find reasons to brush his hand against hers as they worked together, or he'd stand a little too close when they were arranging flowers. Lily, for her part, started to reciprocate in subtle ways. She'd laugh a little louder at his jokes, let her eyes linger on him a little longer than was appropriate. It wasn't long before those fleeting touches turned into something more deliberate. One day, while Rose was out of the store running errands, Tommy found Lily in the back room, sorting through a delivery of fresh roses. The door was slightly ajar, and when she looked up and saw him standing there, something passed between them, an unspoken understanding that they were about to cross a line they could never uncross. Tommy stepped inside, closing the door behind him, the click of the latch sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet of the store. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her as she continued to work, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged the flowers. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and almost hesitant. "You know, Lily, I've been thinking about you a lot lately." She looked up, her breath catching in her throat. She should have stopped him then, should have told him that whatever he was about to say, it wasn't appropriate. But she didn't. Instead, she just stared at him, waiting. "I can't help it," he continued, taking a step closer. "You're just different. Special. I feel like I can talk to you in a way I can't with anyone else." Lily's heart was pounding in her chest. She knew she should say something, anything, to put an end to this, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself moving toward him, almost involuntarily, until they were standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath on her skin. And then he kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, as if he were testing the waters, waiting to see if she would pull away. But she didn't. Instead, she kissed him back, all the tension and longing she had been bottling up for weeks spilling out in that single, reckless act. From that moment on, There was no going back. The affair had begun. They were careful at first, meeting in the back room when Rose was out, keeping their touches and kisses brief, just enough to satisfy the craving without arousing suspicion. But it wasn't long before that wasn't enough. The stolen moments in the store became too fleeting, too constrained. They needed more. It was Tommy who suggested they start meeting outside of work. He was the one who planted the idea in Lily's head, feeding off her growing need for excitement, for something more than the routine of her life. They started small, meeting for coffee during their lunch breaks, sitting in the farthest corner of the cafe where they wouldn't be seen. But even that wasn't enough. Soon, they were spending their lunch breaks together at Lily's house. It was risky, dangerous even, but that was part of the thrill. Tommy would deliver an order of flowers, using it as a cover to slip away with Lily for a stolen hour of passion. They'd rush home, their hands already all over each other before they even made it through the door. It was always frantic, desperate, like they couldn't get enough of each other. The more they gave in to their desires, the more careless Lily became. She started leaving little traces behind. Messages on her phone that she forgot to delete, the scent of Tommy's cologne clinging to her clothes, a stiletto left broken in the rush to undress. But she was too caught up in the whirlwind of the affair to notice the danger. Tommy, for his part, reveled in the power he had over her. He enjoyed being the object of her obsession, knowing that she was willing to risk everything for him. He began pushing boundaries, suggesting new ways to keep their affair exciting. It wasn't long before their encounters grew bolder, more daring. They started sending each other intimate videos and photos, escalating the risk, feeding the flames of their illicit relationship. Lily was hooked. The secrecy, the danger, the thrill of being desired in a way she hadn't been in years. It was all too intoxicating. She found herself thinking about Tommy constantly, replaying their moments together in her mind, craving the next time they would be alone. But as the affair intensified, so did the risks. And in her growing recklessness, Lily began to overlook the little things, the signs that someone else might be watching, that her perfect life was on the verge of unraveling. And all the while, the storm that would eventually destroy everything was quietly gathering on the horizon. The day started like any other. I was at the dealership early, coffee in hand, ready to dive into the never-ending list of tasks that came with running a successful business. The showroom floor was already bustling with activity. Customers browsing the latest models, sales staff chatting enthusiastically about features and financing options. It was a typical day in my world, a world that I'd built from the ground up, one sale at a time. But something was nagging at me, a small, persistent thought I couldn't quite shake. It was a feeling that had been growing over the past few weeks, a sense that something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. That evening, I decided to surprise Lily by picking her up from the flower store. I've been doing that more often lately, using it as an excuse to spend a few extra minutes with her, to reconnect in those small but important ways. When I pulled up to Blooming Inspirations, I could see her through the large front window, arranging a bouquet at the counter. Her movements were graceful, almost practiced, and I couldn't help but admire the care she put into her work. But then I noticed Tommy. He was standing close to her, closer than seemed necessary, talking and laughing in that easygoing way of his. Lily glanced up at him, her smile bright and genuine, the kind of smile that had been missing at home lately. They exchanged a few more words, something light and playful, before Lily handed him the bouquet, her fingers brushing against his as she did. It was a small thing, really, a moment that, under normal circumstances, wouldn't have meant anything. But there was something about the way they interacted, something almost intimate, that made my stomach tighten. I told myself it was nothing, just a co-worker being friendly, but the nagging feeling in my gut told me otherwise. When Lily finally noticed me outside, she waved, her smile shifting into something more familiar, more like the Lily I knew. She grabbed her things, said goodbye to Tommy, and made her way to the car. I tried to shake off the unease as she got in, reminding myself that I had no reason to doubt her. "Hey," she said, leaning over to kiss me on the cheek. "This is a nice surprise. Thought I'd save you the drive," I replied, forcing a smile. Besides, I figured we could have dinner together on the way home." She nodded, her expression softening. "That sounds nice." As we drove, I found myself glancing at her out of the corner of my eye, trying to read her. She was quiet, staring out the window, her mind seemingly elsewhere. I wanted to ask her what she was thinking, what was going on in that head of hers, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, we drove in silence, the unease between us growing with each passing mile. That night, after dinner, I tried to put it all out of my mind. We went through our usual routine, helping the kids with their homework, getting them ready for bed, but the thought of Lily and Tommy lingered. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I had no reason to be suspicious, but the feeling wouldn't go away. A few days later, on a quiet evening at home, something happened that would change everything. Lily had been busy in the kitchen, preparing dinner while I relaxed in the living room. The kids were upstairs, the house filled with the comforting sounds of home. The clatter of dishes, the hum of the dishwasher, the distant laughter of Emily and Jacob as they played. It was a normal evening, one of those rare moments when everything felt right, when the chaos of the day had finally settled into something resembling peace. But then, as I was walking through the kitchen to grab a glass of water, I noticed that Lily had forgotten to take out the trash. The small bin under the sink was overflowing, a reminder of the busyness of the day. Normally, she was meticulous about these things, always keeping the kitchen spotless. It was unlike her to forget something as simple as the trash. "Hey, you forgot this," I called to her, pointing to the bin. "Oh, sorry. I'll get it," she replied, her tone distracted as she stirred a pot on the stove. "No worries, I've got it," I said, waving her off. I figured it was the least I could do, given how much she'd been juggling lately. I grabbed the bag, tying it up as I carried it out to the garage. As I lifted the lid of the trash can, something caught my eye, a small, clear plastic bag that had been tucked away at the bottom of the bin. I hesitated, a strange sense of curiosity and dread washing over me. Setting the larger trash bag aside, I reached down and pulled out the smaller bag. It was sealed, and inside, I could see the contents clearly, something that didn't belong in the kitchen trash, something that stopped me cold. A tube of lubricant, a couple of used condoms, and a broken stiletto heel. My mind went blank for a moment as I stared at the items in my hand, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A dozen thoughts raced through my head, none of them making any sense. How could this be here? What could this mean? My first thought, ridiculous as it was that maybe Emily had something to do with it. She was 14 after all, and maybe no. I dismissed the thought almost as soon as it formed. Emily was a child, still innocent in so many ways, and there was no way she could be involved in something like this. Then my thoughts turned to Lily, to the smile she had given Tommy at the flower store, to the way she had brushed his hand as she handed him that bouquet. Could it be? No. It didn't make sense. Lily was my wife, the woman I had spent nearly 2 decades with, the mother of my children. We had built a life together, a life filled with trust and love. She would never betray that. But as much as I tried to convince myself, the evidence in my hand was undeniable. A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach as the truth began to settle in. This wasn't just some misunderstanding, some mistake. This was something far more devastating, something that I couldn't just brush aside. I stood there, frozen in the garage, the bag of trash forgotten at my feet, as the reality of what I had discovered began to sink in. Lily was having an affair. The thought was like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of me. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat, and I had to steady myself against the side of the trash can to keep from collapsing. How could this be happening? How could she do this to me, to our family? I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to march back into the house, confront her, demand an explanation. But at the same time, I knew I needed to be sure. I needed more than just a bag of damning evidence before I could accuse her of something so horrible, something that would destroy everything we had built together. For a moment, I considered putting the bag back where I found it, pretending I had never seen it, but I knew I couldn't do that. This wasn't something I could ignore. This was a betrayal of the worst kind, and I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I forced myself to calm down, to think rationally. I needed a plan, a way to confirm what I already feared. As much as it pained me, I knew I had to gather more evidence to find out just how deep this betrayal went. I couldn't confront Lily, not yet, not without knowing everything. My mind raced as I walked back into the house, the bag still clutched in my hand. I would install cameras, hidden ones, in places where they would be unobtrusive but would give me the answers I needed. I would watch, I would wait, and I would see the truth for myself. And then, once I knew for certain, I would decide what to do. But until then, I would keep quiet, keep pretending that everything was normal, that nothing had changed. Because for now, that was all I could do. The decision to install the cameras wasn't an easy one, but the evidence I had found left me no choice. That small plastic bag with the lubricant, the used condoms, and the broken stiletto, it was too damning to ignore. My mind raced with thoughts of what could be happening behind my back, and I knew that if I didn't find out the truth, it would eat away at me. The next day, while Lily was at work and the kids were at school, I took the necessary steps. I went out and bought a set of wireless hidden cameras, small, discreet, the kind you could place in a room without anyone noticing. It felt wrong, like I was violating the sanctity of our home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something much worse was already happening. I installed the first camera in the living room, nestled high on a bookshelf where it had a clear view of the couch and most of the room. The second camera went in the bedroom, hidden among some decorative items on a dresser. I was careful, methodical, ensuring that each camera was perfectly placed, capturing every angle without being too obvious. As I worked, a part of me hoped I would find nothing, that this was all a misunderstanding, but deep down, I already knew the truth. Once the cameras were in place, I tested the feed on my phone, making sure everything was working as it should. The images were clear, the sound crisp, and I felt a sick sense of satisfaction knowing that I would finally uncover what had been going on. I didn't tell anyone, not a friend, not a colleague, because I knew this was something I had to face alone. For the next few days, I carried on as if nothing had changed. I went to work, helped the kids with their homework, and kissed Lily goodnight, all while the cameras silently recorded everything. I checked the feed obsessively, every chance I got, waiting for the moment when the truth would be revealed. It didn't take long. A few days later, after a typical day at the dealership, I sat down to review the footage on my phone, as I had been doing each evening. I started with the living room feed, fast-forwarding through the hours of normal activity. The kids watching TV, Lily tidying up, the usual. But then, just after lunchtime, something caught my eye. Lily had come home on her lunch break, which wasn't unusual. She often came home to grab a bite to eat or check on something in the house. But this time, she wasn't alone. Tommy was with her. I felt my heart drop into my stomach as I watched the two of them enter the living room together, their bodies close, their voices low. There was a tension between them, an anticipation that made my skin crawl. I kept watching, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. Lily set her purse down on the table, and without a word, she turned to Tommy, pulling him close. The kiss that followed was nothing like the kisses we shared. It was urgent, hungry, filled with a passion I hadn't seen in years. I could feel my blood run cold as I watched, each second driving the knife deeper into my heart. They didn't waste any time. Tommy's hands were all over her, and Lily responded with equal fervor, pulling him towards the couch. In a matter of moments, their clothes were on the floor, and they were tangled together in a way that made my stomach churn. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The woman I had loved and trusted for so many years, betraying me in the most intimate way possible. I forced myself to keep watching, even though every fiber of my being wanted to look away. I had to know the extent of their betrayal, had to see just how far it went. And it didn't stop there. After their frenzied encounter on the couch, they moved to the bedroom. My bedroom, the room where Lily and I had shared so many memories, where we had whispered to each other in the dark, planning our future together. Now it was tainted, stained by their betrayal. The bedroom feed showed them entering, still half-dressed, still lost in each other. Lily led Tommy to the bed, and in that moment I saw something that made my blood boil. She opened a drawer and pulled out something I recognized immediately, latex lingerie. I had seen it before in catalogs or on store shelves, but never in our bedroom. It was something she had never worn for me, something she had never even hinted at wanting to try. She slipped into the lingerie, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were savoring the moment. Tommy watched her, his eyes filled with desire, and when she finally turned to face him, I could see the power shift between them. She was in control now, taking charge in a way that was both mesmerizing and horrifying to watch. Tommy, on the other hand, seemed to relish being dominated. He let her take the lead, his hands trembling slightly as she pushed him onto the bed. What followed was a scene that made me feel like a stranger in my own home, a twisted tableau of desire and submission that had no place in the life we had built together. The sounds, the movements, the way they interacted, it was all too much. I felt like I was drowning, like the air had been sucked out of the room. The betrayal was more than physical. It was emotional, psychological. It was a betrayal of everything we had shared, everything I had believed in. When it was over, I sat there, staring at the screen, my hands trembling with rage and despair. I had seen enough. I didn't need to watch any more, didn't need to hear the sounds of their breathing as they lay there, spent and satisfied. I turned off the feed, but the images were burned into my mind, replaying over and over like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I wanted to confront her immediately, to demand an explanation, to scream at her for what she had done. But I knew that wouldn't solve anything. I needed to stay calm, to think rationally. I had to decide what to do next, how to handle the situation without losing everything. But as I sat there, alone in the darkness, I knew one thing for certain. Our marriage, our life together, was over. There was no coming back from this, no way to repair the damage that had been done. All that was left was to decide how to make them pay. The day after discovering Lily's affair, I woke up feeling like a different man. The shock, the betrayal, the gut-wrenching pain, it was all still there, but beneath it was something else, something darker. It was a cold, seething rage that simmered just below the surface, a fury that demanded action. But this wasn't the kind of rage that made you shout or throw things. No, this was the kind of anger that required careful planning, meticulous execution. I wasn't going to confront Lily or Tommy in a fit of emotion. That would be too easy for them, too simple. They needed to feel the same devastation I felt, and I knew exactly how to make that happen. As I drove to the dealership that morning, my mind was already at work, formulating a plan that would destroy them both, but in a way they'd never see coming. By the time I walked into my office, I had the outline of that plan clear in my mind. The first step was to find a way to get close to Tommy, to strike at him where it would hurt the most. And that meant going after the person he cared about most, his wife. The opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. That afternoon, as I was reviewing sales reports in my office, my assistant, Mark Thompson, knocked on the door and poked his head in. "Jack, there's a woman here looking at one of the new SUVs. She seems pretty interested, but she wanted to talk to you about financing options," Mark said. "Send her in," I replied, already slipping into my professional demeanor. This was my element, closing deals, making sales, ensuring that every customer left satisfied. But as Mark stepped aside to let the woman in, my focus shifted entirely. She was beautiful in that understated, natural way that turned heads without even trying. Her long, auburn hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and her eyes, a deep hazel, sparkled with a warmth that was immediately disarming. She was dressed casually, in jeans and a simple blouse, but she carried herself with a quiet confidence that spoke volumes. "Hi, I'm Samantha Miller," she introduced herself, offering me a polite smile. "I've been thinking about upgrading my car, and your dealership came highly recommended." Miller. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. This was Tommy's wife. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, almost too perfectly. I had to remind myself to stay calm, to not give anything away. "Nice to meet you, Samantha. I'm Jack Reynolds," I said, shaking her hand with a warm smile. "I'd be happy to help you find the perfect vehicle." We spent the next half hour discussing her options, going over features, and taking a test drive in one of the new SUVs. She was friendly, open, and easy to talk to. and I could see why Tommy would have been drawn to her. She was everything Lily used to be, charming, engaging, and completely unaware of the darkness brewing beneath the surface. As we talked, I made sure to drop little hints about myself, mentioning my role as the owner of the dealership, the success I'd built, and the life I created for myself. I could see that she was impressed, intrigued even. She asked about my family, and I told her just enough to seem open, but not enough to give away the turmoil that was consuming me. By the time we returned to the dealership, I could tell that she was interested, not just in the car, but in me. It was subtle, but I'd been in this game long enough to recognize the signs. The lingering eye contact, the slight shift in her tone, the way she laughed at my jokes just a little too easily. It was all there, and I knew I had her right where I wanted her. Over the next few days, I played the long game. Samantha came back to the dealership a few more times to finalize the details of her purchase, and each time, I made sure to be the one she dealt with. We'd chat about everything: her job, her hobbies, her life. I was careful, never pushing too hard, always letting her come to me. And slowly but surely, she did. Finally, on the day she was scheduled to pick up her new car, I made my move. I invited her to my office to go over the final paperwork, making sure we wouldn't be disturbed. My office was private, soundproof, with a sleek, modern design that spoke of success and power. I could tell she was impressed as she walked in, her eyes taking in the surroundings. "Can I get you something to drink?" I asked, offering her a seat on the leather sofa near the window. "Just water, please," she replied, her voice soft, almost hesitant. I handed her the water, taking a seat next to her, close enough to be intimate, but not enough to make her uncomfortable. We went through the paperwork, chatting easily, and I could see that she was at ease. When the business was done, I leaned back, letting the silence stretch between us for a moment. "You know, Samantha," I began, choosing my words carefully, "I've really enjoyed getting to know you these past few days." She looked up at me, surprised, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something I knew I could exploit. "I feel the same way," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've been so kind, so helpful. It's not often I meet someone who really listens." I smiled, leaning in slightly. "I believe in taking care of my clients. But with you, it's been more than that. I felt a connection, something special." She didn't pull away, didn't try to deflect. Instead, she held my gaze, and in that moment, I knew I had her. The kiss was inevitable. It started slow, a brush of lips that quickly deepened into something more. She melted into me, her hands gripping my shoulders as the heat between us built. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the culmination of days of careful planning. But I wasn't done yet. I pulled away just enough to reach for the small camera I had hidden behind a stack of files on my desk. It was angled perfectly, capturing every detail of our encounter. I positioned myself so that the camera would get a clear shot of what came next. "Wait," she breathed, her voice filled with both excitement and uncertainty. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" I didn't answer with words. Instead, I kissed her again, more forcefully this time, guiding her back onto the sofa. I could feel her resistance melting away as she gave in to the moment, to the desire that had been building between us. As we moved together, the camera captured everything: the passion, the intensity, the way her breath hitched as I whispered her husband's name in her ear. And then, at the peak of it all, I looked directly into the camera, my voice low and filled with venom. "How do you like that, Lily? Tommy?" I knew they would see this. I knew it would destroy them both. And that thought, more than anything, fueled me as I finished what I had started. When it was over, I helped Samantha gather her things, all the while maintaining the facade of a man who had just shared something special. I walked her out to her new car, kissing her one last time before she drove away, completely unaware of the role she had just played in my plan. The next step was to set the stage for the final act of my revenge. A few days later, I called Mark into my office. Mark was a good employee, loyal, efficient, and completely in the dark about what had been happening in my personal life. "Mark, I need you to do me a favor," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I want you to order some flowers for the showroom. You know, something nice to brighten the place up." "Of course, Jack. Any particular kind?" he asked, jotting down notes. Whatever you think will look good. But here's the thing. I want you to order them from Blooming Inspirations, the shop where Lily works. And make sure they're delivered here to my office, around lunchtime. Mark looked puzzled but didn't question it. Sure thing. I'll take care of it. Everything was falling into place. I had already arranged for Lily to meet me at the dealership that day, under the pretense of discussing something important. She had no idea what was coming, no idea that I had orchestrated every detail of this encounter. The day had arrived, the day that would unravel everything, exposing the lies, the deceit, and the betrayal that had been festering beneath the surface of our lives. I sat in my office at the dealership, staring at the large screen on the wall, the remote control resting in my hand. It was eerily quiet, the calm before the storm. Lily had no idea what was coming. She believed she was meeting me to discuss something important, business, family matters, something ordinary. But today was far from ordinary. Today was the day she would face the consequences of her actions, the day she would see just how deeply she had cut me. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one dragging out the anticipation. I had gone over this moment in my head 100 times, rehearsing it, making sure everything would go perfectly. There was no room for error, no second chances. This had to be done right. At exactly noon, the door to my office opened, and Lily walked in. She was dressed simply in a blouse and skirt, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked beautiful, but there was something different about her, an air of distraction, of distance. She smiled as she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Jack," she greeted me, closing the door behind her. "What's this about? You sounded so serious on the phone." I smiled back, though it felt more like a mask than a genuine expression. "I needed to talk to you about something. Something very important." She nodded, taking a seat across from my desk. Her eyes scanned the room, and for a brief moment, they lingered on the large screen behind me. But she didn't ask any questions. Not yet. Before I could say anything more, there was a knock at the door. Right on cue. "Come in," I called, already knowing who it would be. The door opened again, and there stood Tommy, holding a bouquet of fresh flowers. He looked the same as always, confident, charming, completely unaware of the trap he had walked into. But as soon as he saw Lily sitting in the room, his confident smile faltered. His eyes flicked to me, then back to her, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "Delivery for Mr. Reynolds," he said, his voice a little too steady, as if he were trying to convince himself that everything was normal. "Perfect timing, Tommy," I replied, standing up and motioning for him to enter. "Why don't you both take a seat? There's something I want to show you." Lily and Tommy exchanged puzzled glances, but they did as I asked, sitting side by side in front of my desk. I could see the tension between them, the unspoken question in their eyes. They didn't know what was coming, but they could sense that something wasn't right. I walked back to my desk, picking up the remote control, my heart pounding in my chest. I had waited for this moment, planned for it, but now that it was here, the reality of what I was about to do hit me like a sledgehammer. I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my voice steady as I spoke. "Lily, Tommy," I began, my tone deceptively casual. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About us, about our lives, about trust." Lily shifted in her seat, her eyes narrowing slightly as she tried to understand where I was going with this. Tommy, on the other hand, sat perfectly still, his gaze fixed on me, a hint of dread creeping into his expression. "And I've come to realize," I continued, my grip tightening on the remote, "that sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest." With that, I pressed the button on the remote, and the large screen behind me flickered to life. The room was filled with the unmistakable sound of a recording starting. Low voices, the rustle of clothing, the unmistakable sounds of intimacy. Lily's eyes widened in shock as the image on the screen came into focus. It was a recording of me and Samantha Miller, taken just a few days ago, during our carefully orchestrated encounter. The camera had captured everything. The heated kiss, the clothes being shed, the raw, desperate passion that followed. But it wasn't just the act itself that horrified her. It was the moment when I looked directly into the camera, my voice cold and full of venom. How do you like that, Lily? Tommy. The room was silent except for the sound of the recording, which played on, showing every damning detail, every betrayal laid bare for them to see. Lily's face drained of color, her hands trembling in her lap as she watched the scene unfold. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Tommy, on the other hand, looked like he had been struck by a truck. His face turned an ashen gray, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to process what was happening. The confidence, the charm, the easygoing nature, it was all gone, replaced by a look of sheer terror. The video played on, but I wasn't watching it anymore. My focus was entirely on them, on their reactions, on the way they were falling apart right in front of me. This was what I had wanted, what I had planned for. And yet, as I watched them suffer, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief. Just a cold emptiness where my heart used to be. When the video finally ended, I turned off the screen, plunging the room into a heavy silence. Tommy was the first to move. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, his eyes wild with humiliation and fury. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The look on his face said it all. Without a glance back at Lily, he turned and stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him. Lily remained frozen in her seat, her eyes still fixed on the blank screen, as if she couldn't pull herself away from the horror she had just witnessed. Slowly, she turned to look at me, her eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling as she tried to speak. "Jack, I'm so sorry," she stammered, her words barely audible. "I never meant. I didn't want. Please, just let me explain." But I wasn't interested in explanations. I had heard enough, seen enough. I remained standing behind my desk, my expression cold and detached, as if I were watching a stranger beg for mercy. "Explain what, Lily?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "Explain how you lied to me? How you betrayed me? How you destroyed our family?" She flinched at the harshness of my words, her tears spilling over as she shook her head desperately. "I made a mistake, Jack. A terrible mistake. But I love you. I never stopped loving you. Please, just give me a chance to make it right." I stared at her, feeling nothing but an overwhelming sense of finality. This was the woman I had once loved, the woman I had built a life with, the woman who had shattered my heart. And now, as I looked at her, all I could see was the wreckage of everything we had once had. "It's too late, Lily," I said, my voice flat and unyielding. "There's nothing left to save." She sobbed openly now, her hands clasped together as if she were praying for forgiveness. "Please, Jack, I'll do anything. Just tell me what to do, and I'll do it. I'll make it right, I swear." But I wasn't interested in her promises. I wasn't interested in anything she had to say. I had already made my decision. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder of divorce papers. They were ready and waiting for her signature, the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. "This is all that's left," I said, pushing the folder across the desk towards her. "From here on out, we're each on our own." She stared at the folder, her tears falling onto the polished wood of the desk, creating small, dark stains. For a moment, she hesitated, as if she wanted to say something more, to plead with me one last time. But then, she seemed to realize that there was nothing she could say that would change what had happened. With trembling hands, she picked up the folder, clutching it to her chest, as if it were the only thing keeping her together. She stood up slowly, her eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own, and without another word, she turned and walked out of my office. The door closed softly behind her, leaving me alone in the silence, the echoes of our confrontation still ringing in the air. And as I stood there, staring at the empty room, I felt the full weight of what had just happened settle over me. The revenge I had so carefully planned, the destruction I had wrought, it had all played out exactly as I had envisioned. But instead of the satisfaction I had hoped for, there was only a deep, hollow emptiness. The life I had known was gone, shattered by betrayal and revenge. And in its place was nothing but the cold, stark reality that I had lost everything that had once mattered to me. Thank you for listening to this story. Subscribe to the channel, put a like under the video, and write a comment about how you like this story.